Jeffrey Dahmer once told a judge he never deserved freedom and that death felt like the only honest sentence. Wisconsin gave him something colder. They gave him years of waiting, 23 hours a day in an 8x10 cell, chained whenever he moved, surrounded by men who wanted him erased. In the next few minutes, you will see why his short time in prison became a punishment harsher than any execution, and why Dahmer himself stopped fearing the end. When he entered Columbia Correctional Institution in 1992, guards knew this was not just another inmate. This was the man who murdered and ate 17 young men, and everyone inside knew his name. The answer seemed simple: isolation for safety. But isolation is not safety. It is a slow dismantling of the mind, and countdown began before he understood what awaited him. Imagine waking up inside a room so small you can touch both walls without moving your feet. The ceiling hums with fluorescent lights that never truly shut off. Time does not move forward here. It only repeats. Every morning begins the same way. A metal slot opens. Food slides through. A guard's footsteps echo down the corridor. The door never opens unless you are chained like cargo. Your wrists are cuffed. Your ankles are shackled. You are escorted like something dangerous, something disposable. That is how Jeffrey Dahmer began his prison life. Letters arrived from around the world. Some were hateful. Some were curious. Some were disturbingly affectionate. He read them all because they were proof that someone, somewhere, still remembered he existed. A few people sent money. He bought cassette tapes, cigarettes, and magazines. These small items became his only connection to a world that no longer existed for him. For 90 minutes every morning, he cleaned his unit. He swept. He mopped. He wiped down surfaces already clean. When the work ended, silence returned. Hours stretched into days. Days stretched into months. Months stretched into a year. Alone with his memories. Alone with his crimes. Most people think this was his punishment. They imagine isolation as the ultimate suffering. They imagine solitude as the end of the story. They are wrong. For Dahmer, isolation was only the beginning. The real nightmare started when he decided he no longer wanted protection. After 12 months in solitary confinement, he made a request that stunned prison officials. He wanted out. He wanted to join the general population. He wanted to attend classes, eat with others, and work among inmates who knew exactly what he had done. Officials hesitated. They knew the danger. Every inmate in the facility knew his name. Every inmate knew his crimes. But he had been cooperative. He had no major infractions. So they agreed. They transferred him to a unit for inmates with mental and emotional health issues. They assigned him to clean toilets in the prison gymnasium. To the system, it was just another work detail. To Dahmer, it was something else entirely. Why would someone do this? Why would someone choose exposure over safety? The answer lies in what he had said at his sentencing. He never wanted freedom. He wanted death. He believed he deserved execution. But Wisconsin had abolished capital punishment more than a century earlier. No matter what he had done, the state would never kill him. So he built his own death row by stepping into the most dangerous environment possible. Leaving isolation did not bring peace. It brought tension, and Dahmer seemed to feed on it. He leaned into his reputation. He joked with guards. He whispered that he might bite them. He posted signs advertising meetings for Cannibals Anonymous. He shaped his prison food into grotesque imitations of limbs and organs and displayed them in common areas. Inmates reacted with disgust and fear. Some laughed nervously. Others felt genuine rage. Even hardened criminals found his behavior intolerable. Was it mental illness? Was it impulse? Or was it deliberate? Some believe he was trying to provoke someone into killing him. Some believe he could not stop himself. The truth may be somewhere in between. What is certain is that his presence destabilized the unit. In July 1994, an inmate named Uvaldo Duthie targeted him. Duthie pretended to be mentally ill to get transferred into Dahmer's unit. He smuggled a homemade weapon into the prison chapel. During a service, he lunged at Dahmer and tried to cut his throat. The weapon broke. Dahmer survived with minor injuries. Standard procedure required temporary isolation for his safety. But Dahmer refused. He demanded to return to general population. Officials labeled the incident isolated and allowed him back. Think about that decision. Someone had just tried to murder him. There was clear evidence his life was in danger. And instead of accepting protection, he chose to walk back into danger. It was not ignorance. It was intention. At the same time, something unexpected was happening. Dahmer began exploring religion. He requested a Bible. He read creationist literature. He discussed theology with a minister named Roy Ratcliffe. In May 1994, he was baptized in the prison whirlpool. Their conversations focused on guilt, punishment, redemption, and death. Ratcliffe later said that Dahmer questioned whether continuing to live was itself sinful. Their last meeting took place days before his death, discussing the Book of Revelation and final judgment. Whether this transformation was sincere or strategic remains unknown, but it did not change the path he had chosen. November 28, 1994, began like any other morning inside Columbia Correctional Institution. Dahmer reported for his cleaning detail in the prison gymnasium, a routine assignment he had started only weeks earlier. 2 other inmates were assigned to the same area. Jesse Anderson was serving life for murdering his wife. Christopher Scarver was serving life for murder as well. Scarver had been carrying a newspaper clipping in his pocket for weeks. The article detailed Dahmer's crimes, the dismemberment, the cannibalism, the 17 young men and boys. He kept it as a reminder of who he believed he was working beside. That morning, the guards left the 3 men alone for roughly 20 minutes in a facility that housed some of the most dangerous offenders in the state. What happened next depends on who is telling the story. Scarver later said someone poked him in the back while he was filling a bucket with water. He turned and saw Dahmer and Anderson laughing. He could not tell who touched him. The 3 men separated. Scarver followed Dahmer toward a staff locker room, stopped at the weight room, and picked up a metal bar weighing several pounds. He carried it like a baton, calm and deliberate. Scarver confronted Dahmer and showed him the newspaper article. According to Scarver, Dahmer did not yell, did not beg, and did not try to escape. He said he did not care if he lived or died and told Scarver to go ahead and kill him. The words sounded less like fear and more like resignation. What followed was methodical. Scarver struck him across the head and face again and again. He smashed Dahmer's skull against the wall. He then attacked Anderson as well. When guards returned at 8:10 in the morning, they found both men on the bathroom floor. Dahmer was alive but barely. He was taken to a hospital and died within the hour. Anderson died from his injuries shortly after. Scarver returned to his cell and confessed. He said God told him to do it. The deaths raised immediate questions. Scarver has claimed for decades that prison officials knew he hated Dahmer. He said they knew tensions were high and left them alone anyway. He said the guards disappeared moments before the attack. Families of victims reported receiving calls from inmates during Dahmer's incarceration promising that justice would be handled inside the prison. Official investigations concluded Scarver acted alone. Yet the circumstances have never stopped generating speculation. Why were 3 violent offenders left unsupervised in a vulnerable area? Why was Dahmer, who had already survived an attempted murder, still placed in close proximity to inmates who wanted him dead? Why were warning signs ignored? The aftermath created its own ripple effects. Scarver received 2 additional life sentences and was placed in solitary confinement for years. Isolation that once consumed Dahmer now consumed the man who killed him. His mental health deteriorated. He spent more than a decade in near total isolation before being transferred to federal custody. One violent act produced more violence, more confinement, and more damaged lives spreading outward from that gymnasium. Dahmer's total time in prison lasted 3 years, 4 months, and 4 days from his arrest in July 1991 to his death in November 1994. Less than 4 years for crimes that spanned more than a decade. In that brief window, he experienced prolonged isolation, constant threats, a near-fatal attack, a religious conversion, and finally a violent death. Some people argue he escaped justice. They believe his death was too quick and too merciful. Others believe his final years were a punishment beyond anything a court could impose. Consider what those years looked like. Every morning he woke up knowing he was the most hated man in a building full of violent offenders. Every movement carried uncertainty. Every interaction carried risk. He lived under a permanent death threat without a scheduled execution date. That uncertainty can be more torturous than a fixed sentence. Psychologists argue that the human mind depends on predictability and connection to survive. Dahmer had neither. Isolation removed connection. General population removed safety. Religion removed certainty. He existed in a psychological limbo between punishment and redemption. He acknowledged this reality himself. He told the court that prison would be terrible and that he deserved whatever happened. He told his pastor he should have been executed. He walked into general population knowing exactly what might happen. When the metal bar came down on his skull, his final words suggested he had been waiting for that moment. Death is often described as the harshest punishment. Dahmer's experience suggests something more complex. Living with what he had done, surrounded by people who knew exactly who he was, may have been a slower and more painful sentence than any execution. His life became a prolonged psychological execution stretched across years instead of seconds. His story forces an uncomfortable question about justice. Wisconsin abolished the death penalty, believing life imprisonment was more humane. In Dahmer's case, life imprisonment created conditions where death arrived anyway, delivered not by the state but by another inmate. Whether that outcome was mercy, negligence, or something darker is still debated. Debate continues among scholars, victims' families, and prison officials. Some see poetic justice, others see systemic failure. Dahmer's case remains a grim lens into punishment psychology and the unintended consequences of policies meant to be humane. Jeffrey Dahmer's story forces us to question what justice really means. Wisconsin abolished the death penalty, believing life in prison was more humane. But his years behind bars tell a more disturbing story. He endured isolation that fractured his mind, then stepped into danger he knew would end his life. The state did not execute him. It created a path where someone else did. Whether that is justice or something else is for you alone to decide.